Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a sagey lamb soup with sweet potatoes, carrots, lentils, and spinach. And then we are going to make some jerk chicken sandwiches and prep up 2 sourdough loaves for tomorrow night. So we're going to get the meatballs ready for our lamb soup. So I'm going to take one slice. So we're going to get the meatballs ready for our lamb soup. So I'm going to take one slice, soggy, but not like dripping in it. You want it to soak up all the milk and get soggy, but you don't want a lot of excess milk. And we're using this instead of breadcrumbs because I find this gives you the base to hold your meatball together without drying it out. So we're going to soak our one slice of bread in some cream. You can see it's just in the bread, but not really pooling below it. And then we're going to add 1 egg. So you want per pound of meat, you do 1 egg, 1 slice of bread. And we're going to add our spices in here for our meatball, and then we'll add our ground lamb in. So we're going to add in about a teaspoon of garlic salt. There we go. And then we're going to add in, I want to say, a half a teaspoon of dried sage, half a teaspoon of dried thyme, because we are going to put some fresh ones in there as well, but this will just give it a little bit more oomph. And then a little bit of black pepper, about a half a teaspoon. And then before I get my hands all dirty and mushing it up, we're going to let that sit for a second. I'm going to chop up some fresh sage, a couple of leaves here, about 5 or 6 leaves, because we're going to use some of that in our soup. And then some fresh thyme. And I'm just going to pull the leaves off of these real quick. So about a few sprigs of fresh thyme. There we go. Get just all those nice fragrant leaves in here. Because we did put our dry ones in, but this is going to give just a nice little pop of color into our meatball and also a lovely kind of fresher taste to it. There we go. And I just want to get the leaves, try to avoid putting too many sprigs in there, although sometimes it's hard to de-leaf them. And I find that sage and thyme just go really well with lamb. And of course, we're going to put in a little bit of parsley here, about a teaspoon. I'm kind of making a whole little group of herbs. And then a couple snips of green onion. We're going to use the rest of this in our soup, but I want to just use some in here as well. And now I'm going to take this little herby mixture here and I'm going to dice it up pretty finely so I have the fresh herbs minced up really well. That way they'll go into our meatballs nicely. So we're going to go over it several times. And this is just going to give a really nice fresh burst of flavor in the lamb meatballs. And again, that was sage, fresh thyme, fresh parsley, and some green onions. And it smells very fragrant. There we go. We've almost got a nice, and you want to mince it up finely because you don't want to have any huge, like herby leaves in your meatballs. There we go. Okay, we're going to add all of this into our meatball mix with our dried herbs and our egg and our soaked bread. Okay. Slide my sleeves up because we're going to get a little messy here. Now we're going to go in here and you got to do it with your hands. We're going to really smush all of this herby stuff together to create a really aromatic paste. And this is going to be the binder that holds our meatballs together. There we go. And so you just got to kind of really smush it through. There's no way to really do it without getting your hands in. And so once you've gotten like all of that bread smushed together, and with this, you want to kind of use a like a soft kind of, white bread that was like a honey wheat. You don't want to use anything that has too much of a like a crust on it, because that won't get soggy, or like it will just stay there, and then you'll have big chunks of things. And then we're going to put a pound of ground lamb in here. So squeeze it all out of this package. There we go. And we're done with the scissors. So we've got our ground lamb and our herby paste, and we're going to really just work this into our lamb. And we want to make sure that it gets spread up, like evenly mixed through, so that every bite has that nice herby flavor to it and is well seasoned. And I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. We are going to make little small meatballs, because, you know, when you're having a soup, you're eating with a spoon, so you don't want to have a huge meatball. Let's see. Okay, so here we've got our meat and our herb really mixed together well. You can see all the green spread throughout. And got a little baking sheet here, and I'm just going to make kind of little tiny meatballs. They will shrink down a little bit when we cook, but I don't want to do them too big, because you want them to be spread throughout your soup and be able to eat them up easily. We're just going to pinch these off. There we go. And that's why I said 1 pound of meat will make a lot of these cute little meatballs. They're like the perfect size for little soups. And then we'll pop these in the oven and bake them for a few minutes. I always bake my meatballs before putting them into our soup, so that if you put like them in your soup raw, they'll just fall apart.
You have a question. Is lamb gamey?
It is gamier than beef, but it's not super gamey. You can definitely tell that it has, you know, there, but when you really season it up well, the herbs just kind of pair nicely with that gamey flavor. And so it doesn't bother me. And I've had some meat before that was too gamey, but this one, as I like it. It's pretty mellow, and even my kids like the lamb for our, you know. So and there's when you're also making a nice rich broth for this, for our lamb soup, it kind of mellows it out as well. There we go. And so here we're just making our little teeny meatballs, and they're gonna shrink up a little when we bake them in the oven, but they have a nice herby flavor with the fresh sage, parsley, thyme, and then we used an egg and some cream to bind them together. And again, using the bread soaked in the cream versus breadcrumbs leads for a much more tender meatball. So it holds together just as well, but it doesn't dry out. And I think that's my biggest complaints with most meatballs, is they get really dry. And this is just my little like trick to make sure they stay nice and tender and juicy. There we go. And then you see, this is just 1 pound of lamb, but it's going to give me a whole bunch of little meatballs, which will be perfect for our soup. I feel like meatballs don't get utilized in soups a lot, but I mean, I know you have like that Italian wedding soup that has meatballs in it. I make this French onion soup that I do with an herby pork meatball, which is just lovely. But I find that like a lot of people just do like ground beef or whatnot in the soup. And I feel like meatballs and soup work really well, because they stay flavorful in your broth. Okay, I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse, and we are going to throw that in the oven. Okay, get some soap here. I will say meatballs are always messy, but I feel like they're worth it. They're delicious and yummy, yummy. Get a quick paper towel, and now we're going to pop these in the oven. I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees, and these will cook up fast. They're going to cook a lot faster than a meatball, like a bigger meatball that we do for spaghetti. So these will be done in like 10 or so minutes.
You have a question? Do you have a cookbook? people are looking for new meal ideas.
I do not have a cookbook. I've gotten lots of requests for ones. I don't have a cookbook, but I do upload all of my videos on the link on our page. So you could always go back and check through all of our past, meals that we've cooked up and recreate them there. Because I always try to tell everyone the exact amount of ingredients that I'm using so you can recreate the recipe at home. And we do, yeah. And then we have thumbnails that give you a little video or picture of what each meal is on next to it. And I think we have like 200 or 300 videos, like 200 videos on there. Okay, before we start prepping our sourdough red bread, we are going to get our onion caramelizing up. This is what always enhances your soup, is if you can spend the time to caramelize your your diced onions. So I put about a tablespoon of olive oil into my Dutch oven. And today I am actually using, so this one is not an enamel coated Dutch oven. It's actually a cast iron Dutch oven with a handle, but it's the same thing. It's from Le Creuset. I have just varieties of them that I just rotate through. But this one, I wanted it to be a little bit wider because of the meatballs and the lentils when I cook versus taller. Okay, I'm going to give a nice kind of a smaller dice on my onions. And then we're going to toss them in that olive oil and we're going to let them caramelize up. And then we're going to prep our sourdough breads for tomorrow night. Here we go. And like I always say, if your knife slips when you're cutting it, you just need to sharpen it up. It doesn't mean you have a bad knife. It just means it's dulled. And, I find the best sharpeners are just the good old fashioned ones, the honing steel. It's super simple to use. It's not a crazy contraption and they do sharpen them up well. I also heard that Williams and Sonoma, they will sharpen your knives for you if you bring them to it. I've never actually done it, but I've heard it before. Okay, I'm gonna give a little coat these with the olive oil in there. There we go. And now I have my Dutch oven on about a 6 out of 10, so slightly over medium heat, and we're gonna start to let these caramelize up. And while we do that, let's prep our sourdough. We are going to make our basic traditional loaf, which is always everyone's favorite, and then a pepperoni and mozzarella loaf. So I fed my starter this morning, and apparently I didn't leave enough room because it has bubbled up. So I'm gonna have to switch out my cheesecloth. But you can see when I pull this off, look at all of that nice bubble action from our starter. That is what you want when you're making bread. My rule is I feed mine about 4 to 6 hours before I make my loaf. So typically in the morning when I'm making kids lunches, I'll feed it and use it. We're going to use 100 grams of nice active bubbly starter. And there we go. So that's the first one. And then we're going to put 100 grams in our next one. So both bases, I'm using the same base loaf for each one. Now there are times that I will switch up the base loaf depending on what my mix-ins or add-ins are. But this one is just an inclusion really with a little bit of herbs, so I don't need to change my base recipe. And so we're adding 100 grams of nice active sourdough starter. I'll put that over there. I'm going to give my onions a little stir. I can start to smell them now. I said nothing better than, I will say, onions and garlic. They always make your kitchen smell delicious. Now we're going to add 375 grams of warm water. You want warm water because that will help it hydrate the flour faster, incorporate it. So you'll start out with a stickier dough, but then it kind of dries up over time. Okay. And again, you want 375 grams of warm water. And always, my recommendation is to always use a scale, because it when you're scooping out flour, you can be very inaccurate, up to 50 grams off, which can make a huge difference in your measuring. Because if you were to do 3 cups and each one was 50 grams too heavy or 50 grams too light, you're either going to have a really wet dough or a really dry dough. So the scale is where it's at when it comes to baking. And we're going to do 375 warm water. And you don't have to be perfect. If you do 380 over 375, it's fine. It's such a minuscule amount, that's not going to make a big difference. So don't fret if you're not perfect on it. And before we do that, we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of salt to each one. So we're going to do, that's 1, 2, 1, 2. And for my bougie specialty loaf, we're going to add in a tablespoon of Italian spices, and some oregano. So about a half a tablespoon of oregano. That's going to give you just an all around really good flavor that will meld well with the pepperoni and the mozzarella cheese. Now I'm going to take my, just whisk and make sure all of the starter gets dissolved in the water. There we go. And then the same here. And I like to add my spices in now during this process versus like kneading them in during an inclusion, because I like them to hydrate in the water as well with the flour. And now all we're going to do is we are going to add 500 grams of unbleached bread flour to each bowl. And we'll use our Danish whisk to mix the dough together, and we'll let it hydrate for a minute. So 500 grams, again, is about 3 cups, but it really can vary, with how much you scoop it. Here we go. So we've got 500 grams there. Back at 0. We're going to add 500 grams to this one. We'll mix it all together. Now we're done with the scale. We're done with the flour for now. I'm going to use my whisk. And I will say, if you're starting your sourdough journey, I love the whisk. It helps really incorporate it without getting stuck on a spoon or whatnot. It just mixes your dough together really well. There we go. So we've got it. Perfect. So you're going to start with your bread always is actually, because this is a high hydration loaf, it starts out sticky. But over time, it gets less and less sticky as the flour hydrates. So don't worry if it's too sticky. What you can do, 2 ways to tackle that, is either to wet your hands when you work with it or flour your hands. Either one works well. Here we go. And we're going to mix this up, and then we're going to let them sit while we cook up everything, but before we do our stretches and folds and add in our inclusion part. And again, this bread won't be ready to bake up until tomorrow night. So sourdough is not a hard thing to do. It's just a lengthy process. And but it's worth it. Give my hands a quick wash. We're going to let those sit and hydrate. Got our onions here starting to caramelize up nicely. So I'm going to add in some garlic. If I can open it. There we go. So I'm going to use minced garlic. I'm going to put in about a heaping teaspoonful, which is about 2 to 3 cloves of fresh garlic if you want to take the time to mince it up. Give this a nice stir. There we go. I'll let that kind of crisp up a little, bring out those flavors. And while that is doing it, I'm going to take about 5 stalks of celery here. We're going to trim off the ends because these were the pre-washed, pre-cut. And we want to make sure.
You have a question? Why won't the sourdough be ready until tomorrow?
So sourdough has no yeast in it. And we're going to walk over and grab our meatballs for a whole thing. And so it has, you don't added yeast. It has naturally occurring yeast, which takes time for it to leaven your bread, making your bread rise. And so when I make sourdough, I do 2 hours of stretch and folds with, every 20 to 30 minutes. Perfect. And then it sits on my countertop rising for about 4 to 6 hours. Then I shape it and I put it in my Banneton baskets, where our like special baskets lined with cheesecloth, and put it in my fridge. And we do what we called a cold proof. And I do that for about 24 hours, 24 hours before I bake it. That gives the bread a nice spring. But again, I do have some videos on how to make sourdough and my recipe posted on the link on our page. So if you're really interested in that, you can. But it is hard to, you can't make a same day sourdough. It just doesn't ever turn out right because it doesn't have time to bulk up. So here are our lamb meatballs. I pulled them out of the oven and we made those with delicious ground lamb, a bread soaked in cream, eggs, lots of delicious herbs that will go into our soup.
You have a question? Do you ever make frozen food, or is everything you do homemade?
Everything I've done is homemade. I will say I do make like chicken nuggets sometimes. I always buy a bag of chicken nuggets because my 13-year-old son loves them, and that is when we're home on the weekends. He always requests that for lunch. So if I'm not making a lunch, he'll cook himself up some chicken nuggets. But outside of that, like
some accessory stuff, like
pasta or I will say I buy some frozen pasta, like the egg noodles for chicken noodle soup. I buy that frozen, and for my son, he has tortellini almost every single day for lunch. That's what he always wants, that I send to school. I buy that in the refrigerated section, and I buy frozen rice. But no, we don't eat like a frozen dinner or anything like that. And that, I just think, was how I was raised. I never had frozen dinners either growing up. And so it's just natural for me to cook everything. Okay, so I put in my celery. That was about 5 stalks. I'm going to just toss them in here with our garlic and our onions. And we're going to, let's do our carrots. We're going to give our carrots a quick peel. I'm using 4 good-sized carrots. We're going to take off this outer skin because it is dried out, not as good flavor, and it won't cook up as nicely. There we go. So if you can use, baby carrots or whatnot if you wanted to. Those are already washed and peeled, so you don't have to worry about doing this. But we have a large family, so I buy most of my produce and stuff in bulk from like Costco or whatnot. So you always got to live with what they offer there. And I can get a big, huge bag of carrots there. And I'll just take the extra time to peel them up, which actually keeps the flavor in the carrot longer than if they've been peeled and washed. They don't dry out as much. They're more tender. So I don't mind the extra 5 seconds it takes to peel it up. We're going to take off the tops, and then we're going to kind of take off these ends. There we go. Let me give a nice little stir here. And then we're going to just chop these carrots up. And then when I get to the thicker part, I'm going to halve them because I don't want any huge pieces of carrots in here. Okay, so we got that part, and now we're going to halve these. We're also going to add in some sweet potatoes, spinach, fresh herbs, and lentils to our soup as well. So they'll kind of all go really well together with the lamb meatballs, which is nice. I kept thinking, oh, maybe we're done with this winter. And then it's this weekend. We have a bunch of soccer games. And of course, they're early morning. And we looked at the high tomorrow is like 38 in, or not the high, but it'll be 38 when my daughter's playing soccer. And I'm just like, oh, I am not, I was ready for the nice warm. We had 80 degrees like a week and a half ago, and now back to 30s. My good thing I didn't plant my garden. I was so ready to start my garden. And I'm hoping this is the last cold spell and that we can finally get it. But I feel like Tennessee likes to play tricks on you. You think you're going to be ready. You think spring is finally sprung, and then winter creeps back in. I've got two big sweet potatoes here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the ends, and then I'm just going to do a quick knife peel with my sweet potato, just kind of following along the curves. I find this goes so much faster than doing it with a peeler, and you can really get that. If you can see right here, you have like a really white part before the skin. That doesn't cook up as nicely on a sweet potato, so I like doing with a knife cut. You kind of get all of that off. It's a little bit, that part's a little bit more dry and starchy, and I find it's not too bad to cut with a knife. It goes much faster. I do this with a lot of my awkward like squash as well, because it is hard to get the peeler around them. Give this a nice stir. And we're going to just go right along here. And with sweet potatoes, you really got to take the peel off. It's not like a potato where you can leave it on. Sweet potato peels just aren't good. At least, I mean, I'm sure you can probably eat them, but they're just dry and not a lot of flavor in them. There we go. Now I'm going to kind of cube these up into nice kind of smaller pieces. So I'm going to cut this one in third because it's kind of a skinny one. And sweet potatoes, unlike carrots, if you cook them too long, they get a little bit more mushy. So I like to make sure I've got my root vegetables all kind of cooked up, like my carrots and my celery and whatnot, first before I toss these in. They're the last ones I go in, just because they're a bit more tender. But I will say, sweet potatoes hold their shape much better than butternut squash. Butternut squash definitely falls apart a lot more. Get this last one chopped up. We're going to throw it in there. And I really like to brown like my vegetables up before we do the broth, because it really enhances the flavor of the broth as well as the texture of the vegetables. It's something simple, but it allows a lot more flavor to develop.
I have a question. What's the name of the soup you're making?
We are making, it's a lamb and lentil soup. This is, when I cook, I just kind of make up recipes as we go based on ingredients and how they go together. So I really wanted to use lamb, and I love lamb and sage. They just are a great pairing together. So we have fresh sage in here, and sage really works well with sweet potatoes. So we kind of marry it all together to make this delicious kind of soup with spinach and some fresh thyme and parsley. There we go. Just kind of making sure I get all of that nice seasonings on the bottom coated on here. And we are going to put our lentils in. This is about a half a cup of lentils. I don't try to go too crazy overboard on the lentils because they do absorb a lot of liquid, and I like them to be more of an accent than the star of the show. Now, I do have some other recipes that I make lentils, more prominent if it was a true lentil soup, but this is like a side. He's like a sidekick. He's like the Robin to your Batman.
You have a question. Will this video be posted on the link?
Yes, it will take us a little while, like an hour or two. We have to wait for things to download, but I do post everything on the link. Okay, I like them saute up the lentils just a little bit. It kind of increases their texture a little better. So while we are doing that, I'm going to take our thyme and our sage. I'm going to leave my parsley and the rest of my green onions for later, but my thyme and my sage, I'm going to mince up now, and I'm going to toss them in our soup. so they can bring out the flavors with the broth. And I want to make sure they get a little bit of skillet time.
Question: what flavor do lentils have?
Lentils are like a bean. If you've never had them before, they're pretty mild. They have a similar texture to a bean, like a plain, I want to say like a northern bean, or not a kidney bean, but like a mix between a northern bean and a red bean. So very mild. And I feel like they kind of soak up a lot of the flavors that you get. So they start out small, and as they rehydrate, they get a little bigger. So they kind of pick up the flavor. A little maybe nutty undertones to them. They're used in a lot of curry dishes, which I have a curried lentil soup that I make, but they're nice. They have good protein in them as well. Okay, we've got our thyme and our sage minced up really nice. Looks like there was a sweet potato that got in there. So we're going to put these fresh herbs in now. And we're going to let them toast up in here real quick with our sweet potatoes, our carrots, our lentils, celery. Nice. And now I'm going to get some broth ready. Where's my, use my big thing. I'm going to put in chicken bouillon and water, but you could use straight up chicken broth if you want. I do find that chicken bouillon, you can get a bit more chicken flavor out of it. You could also do, vegetable bouillon if you wanted, but I think the chicken is nice. We're using 4 cups to start.
You have a question? Instead of dry lentils, can you use canned beans?
You could, yes. If you were going to do a canned bean, I would recommend a cannellini bean or a Great Northern bean. A white bean would be really good with this. I was actually deciding whether to do that bean or this, because I don't necessarily meal plan. I kind of go out and I grab what I want to make. And I was looking in there and I was deciding, and I decided on lentils today. But it would work really well with it. We're going to do a big heaping scoop of chicken bouillon here. This is going to flavor up, give us the chicken broth thing, and it's also going to be like add the saltiness to our soup. So I just find bouillon works better than broth. I find chicken broth, unless you make it yourself, and that's a whole nother project, it's typically pretty bland. So chicken bouillon gives you a bit more flavor because you don't have to use as much liquid as it recommends. There we go. I'm going to give it a nice little stir. And I think I'm going to put in just a smidge more water, maybe another cup. Because I know my lentils are going to absorb some, and I want to still have a little bit of a good broth. So we're just going to put about a cup more. There we go. Okay, now we're going to bring this up to a nice simmer. And before we move on to the spinach and the meatballs, let's make our sandwiches that we're going to go with. Like, our tray has cooled down. And we're going to make some jerk chicken sandwiches. I picked up some jerk chicken at the deli this weekend. Or not this weekend, earlier this week. Sometimes I forget what day it is. And I was like, oh, we'll use them up. So last night we made these delicious sourdough. They were like a hybrid between a sourdough and a yeast bread. It used a half a teaspoon of yeast and then like a 1/3 cup of sourdough starter. So we're going to use these for the bread base of our sandwiches because they were so good. We only have 2 left. So that kind of shows you how delicious they were. So I'm going to just cut each one in half down the middle. There you go. And you guys can see we had nice like bubbly crumb on it. So it wasn't a true sourdough bread, but they did take about 8 hours of kind of rising. So more than, a yeast bread typically is just about 3, but a sourdough needs a little bit longer. So they did have a little bit of a longer rise than regular, but worth it. They're so delicious. We're going to get, I think, 2 pieces of lettuce ready. And let me turn up our things. I want a nice bubble on it. We're going to use boar's head jerk turkey. If you've never had it before, it has a little bit of a kick to it. Jerk spices can be a bit spicy. use just a smidge of red onions. You want to use red onions. You don't want to use like a white onion or a yellow because they're very astringent. Red onions are where it is at for fresh, like for sandwiches. And I'm going to cut up some tomatoes, some slices, and then I'm going to make a garlic, kind of like a garlic aioli for our sandwiches because I always like to have a sauce on it. It helps just like bind everything together. So we're going to use about a tablespoon of mayo. There we go. Let me grab my garlic, salt, and a little bit of olive oil. We're going to put just a drizzle of olive oil in here, like a half a teaspoon. You don't need much because a little goes a long way. And we're going to use some of the minced garlic. You don't mince garlic, even though it's not as potent as fresh garlic, will be strong. So you want, for this small amount, about a third of a teaspoon, a fourth of a teaspoon, just a little bit, because we're going to smash it into our mixture to kind of bring out the flavors. And then a pinch of garlic salt, like a half, not even a half a teaspoon. And then we're just going to mix it all together, and you really want to smash that in there. That garlic will bring out a little flavor, so it gives you a little pop in there. I didn't want to do anything too spicy today. I was thinking about a Cajun thing, but jerk chicken is pretty spicy on its own, and I'm a spice baby. And let's just add a little bouginess to it. Get some fresh parsley here. We're going to just chop it in here. Perfect. That will give a little brightness too. And again, really trying to smush with your spoon that garlic to kind of turn it into a paste. Now you can always buy garlic paste in the refrigerated section of like the produce aisle where they kind of keep the other tubed fresh spices. You could do that and that would work great for it. But I'm always, the thing is I can smush it myself and save buying another thing. Okay, we've got our rolls here. Put a nice little smear on each side of the roll. There we go. And then I'm going to be using some havarti. Because it just goes well to kind of cut down on the creaminess or the spiciness of the chipotle. And some jerky turkey. There we go. We're going to add it on. I'm going to just fold them in half so they're nice. They're not super big. And with sandwiches, since we're not really melting them, you know, like with a grilled cheese, you can definitely go a little bit heavier on the meat if you want to. And then let's get put our lettuce down on each one. Spread our tomatoes and our red onions. We have our sandwiches to go with our soup. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Oh, lost the thing. Let's get our stick over here on our soup. We're going to give it a nice stir. Very good. I like to give it a nice taste before we throw in our meatballs. Make sure we don't need to add anything. We'll add in our spinach at the last minute because you don't want it to wilt away to nothing. We need to add a little bit of pepper, about a half a teaspoon. Want it a little bit stronger, but outside of that, it's tasting great. So we're going to pop these meatballs in here so they can start collecting up some of the nice juices in the broth as well. And these are cooked. We cook them all the way through at 400. But these will add a nice kind of, they get really tender in the soup, which is nice. They don't dry out. And we're going to let this simmer. And while we do that, we're going to make the inclusion for our sourdough bread over there. So I'm just going to turn it down and we're going to let it simmer. So we prepped our dough for we have our traditional loaf, and now we need to fold in our pepperoni and for our pepperoni and mozzarella loaf. So all we have to do is we got to chop. I'm going to just clear this out of the way. We got to chop up some pepperoni because you don't want to put full slices of pepperoni in. It just won't. Then you'll bite in and you'll pull out a whole thing. So we want about, because this is going to be a good sized loaf, I want to say about a 1/3 cup of pepperoni. Let me get a knife. And what we're going to do is we're going to cube this up into nice small pieces. Go through there. And as we cut it, it should all fall apart, but we want to make sure we go through it again with our hands and kind of break it apart so you don't have one piece that is like 20 pepperonis and then no parts of it. But you don't want to go too crazy on the pepperonis because pepperonis do have oil in them. And if you bake them out, if you put too much, your loaf can get little oil pockets in it. So pepperonis also have a pretty strong flavor. So a little can go a long way. There we go. So now we've got our pepperonis here. I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to break it apart, make sure we don't have any huge pieces. And we're going to start with our specialty loaf, and we're going to do our stretches and fold. So I'm going to kind of pull apart, make a little well in there. And we're going to put all of our pepperonis in there. And then we're going to put in about a cup of shredded mozzarella. This is where I recommend you use a high quality mozzarella that doesn't have a caking agent on it. So I like Tillamook. They're my favorite. I think or shred it yourself. If you shred it yourself, that will do well because a lot of times, they put this anti-caking agent on it so the cheese doesn't stick together, but that can really mix with your bread. So we're going to just kind of stretch it up and fold it over. And I'm going to do this a couple of times until my inclusion is mixed well. And I like to do this on my first set of stretches and folds because that way, by the time I've done all of my stretches and folds, it's really mixed up well. And this is important because this develops the gluten chain. So you really need to do this so that your crumb really turns out well on your sourdough. Okay. Now, I'm just going to pick off these pepperonis and put them back in there. And get my hands a little bit wet, and we'll do it with this one. Wash off some of the pepperonis. There we go. Now, like I said, sourdough is a sticky dough, so you can either flour your hands or you can use wet hands, because when you use wet hands, it just slides right off of you. But as the flour rehydrates from the water, it gets less sticky. So we're pulling up and we're folding over. And this is really key. And then what we'll do is I do this again every 20 to 30 minutes for another 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And then we let it sit and kind of bulk rise on its own. Okay, let me get a spoon for our soup. We're almost done with this soup, and then we can serve up our lunch. Okay. So we've got our lentils in here. You can see they've already started to expand. They've gotten bigger. They'll be nice and tender. What we're going to do is we are going to add in some spinach and then our chopped herbs, and we will be done. We're going to chop up. So I'm going to start with a big handful of spinach. And then we'll probably add a little bit more. It just always, you've got to push it under and let it wilt for just a second. There we go. But it is a really pretty soup. I will say that that orange from the sweet potatoes and the carrots really like pop with the green. And then you see, of course, the luscious lamb meatballs. Now let's chop up while that's wilting. We've got a little bit of parsley left over, about a tablespoon, and our green onions. So I'm gonna give these a quick chop. There we go. And then we're gonna mince up these with our parsley, and we'll add it in. This just adds a really nice fresh burst to our soup. Okay. Perfect. And you don't need to go crazy small like this. And now we're just gonna slide it in. We're gonna add it and give it a nice good stir. And then our soup should be nice and ready. It doesn't take long for the carrots and the sweet potatoes to cook up, especially when you make them nice and small and tender like that. They just absorb and get soft really easily. Okay, let me get a bowl and we will serve up our lunch today. Okay, so get this out here. We've got our delicious jerk chicken sandwich. Tomato ran away. Isn't that funny? So we've got our delicious jerk chicken sandwich and our soup with sweet potatoes, carrots, and some lamb meatballs. And what I like to do with my soup is I top it with a little bit of shaved Parmesan cheese because it just melts in nicely with it and just gives a great like cheesy flavor to it. But again, we made our delicious lamb and meatball soup with lentils, sweet potatoes, carrots, spinach, fresh sage, thyme, and a jerk chicken sandwich on our homemade sourdough rolls that we had for dinner last night. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, show you what we're making. And again, we do upload all of the videos on the link on our page. It does take us a little while to get them up there, but you can always find our recipes there and recreate them with that. Well, guys, thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.